Look at this red on my stock screen. I can't believe what's going on. Stocks are down. Does it mean I'm a loser? I don't know. I need some self-worth now.
Oh, God. In 3, 2.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sachs.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, besties. Queen of quinoa. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. The All In podcast is back. Apologies about last week. I had a personal emergency.
Are we allowed to say why?
Of course. I mean,
you can say it. Go say it. Say it.
Anyway,
it's a humble brag.
With us today on the program.
Explain it.
You want to say it?
Queen of quinoa, David Friedberg, Chamath Palihapitiya, the dictator, and the Rain Man himself, David Sachs. I was on a world tour.
No. Come on. Just...
I'll tell the story. Obviously, I don't like to talk about a certain friend of mine because he's very high profile, and I don't talk about it in public.
Just flex. Just flex.
Just do it and move on.
I have been lifting. I just want to let people know the gun show's back.
No, you were backstage at SNL helping Elon with the SNL appearance. Were you not?
This is true.
Tell us what that was like. Tell us about the backstage experience at SNL.
Tell us about the backstage experience. I mean, we were living it out in real time with you guys, but tell us what it was really like.
First, tell us why Elon recruited you to do it.
All right, so...
Are you Elon's funniest friend?
Arguably. Well, I mean, he's got a lot
guys, hold on. Don't you remember the joke at Sachs's roast 5 years ago? Remember when Elon was late and I had that ad-lib joke? There were two jokes that I landed at Sachs's thing, which I thought were fun. No, Jason, my thing. When I was being roasted? No, wait, was it Jason's party? Sachs. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I hosted Jason's roast.
That's right. That's right. It was your roast. It was your roast. Yeah. Anyways, okay, go ahead. You're the funniest
Otherwise
friend.
known as the funniest night of...
all of our collective lives.
Yes, it was really funny. Oh my God,
that was really funny.
We'll have to tell stories from that sometime.
Sometime we'll tell the J. Cow roast.
You probably are Elon's funniest friend and have a talent for writing. Let's not beat around the bush.
You do. Let's not beat around the bush.
Okay, so thank you for that. I'll take the compliment. So I left to go on a little trip to go to Austin to see some friends and then Miami to see some friends. One of those friends who I hooked up with and was hanging out with in Miami was obviously Elon. And he was doing Saturday Night Live, and we were just coming up with ideas around the dinner table, and we were just laughing our asses off, just brainstorming ideas that would never be allowed on television, and he said, hey, would you come with me to Saturday Night Live? And I was like, oh, that's great. Do you have enough tickets? I assumed he meant Saturday night, and he said, no, I don't have a lot of tickets. It's COVID. It's like half his money. Would you come with me to the writer's room and just, be my wingman, basically. So I had like 3 or 4 board meetings and 5 podcasts. So I just, I talked.
So it was like an instant yes.
So I talked
you checked your schedule?
I was like,
you had to check your schedule?
Yeah. I didn't have to check my schedule. No, I mean, I take my work seriously.
You're like, so Elon, can you give me about half a second to decide?
Well, I had already made the decision in my mind that if my friend needs help, you guys have been in similar situations where you've asked me for help. I've rolled with Chamath on speaking gigs or going down to try to, save Sachs from going into complete utter madness.
Oh my God!
In Cabo.
This was not crisis management. Anyway, so you said yes, you went.
So I said yes, and without giving without giving away anything that was private or confidential, they have a process that they've been doing for 46 years. And we came in, with our own process of what we wanted to do. And it kind of was, kind of an interesting thing because a lot of the ideas I had were, let's just say, a little too far out for the cast or for the writers, but some of them landed. And I got to spend a lot of time with Lorne Michaels, and I really worked on my impersonation of him.
He's Canadian.
And I was like, so Lorne, tell us, who were the worst hosts ever? And he's like, it's an interesting question, Jason. We don't like to think of it that way. But in terms of people who thought they were smart and maybe were not as smart as they thought they were, Stephen Seagal was a little bit difficult. And
what a safe choice. That's a very safe choice.
There was Chris Christopherson, back in 78. He wasn't the musical guest. That was Carly Simon. And he liked to drink, and in this very green room in 78, he had a couple of drinks during the dress rehearsal. So we wheeled in some coffee, and like any sports team, when the game starts, we play the game. Sometimes we win.
Who was responsible for the Chad skit?
Okay, so Chad's an existing character. And that was a really amazing one to watch because we went to Brooklyn to a warehouse and the production was incredible. And what the role I played, if I'm being totally honest, is to just, be Elon's friend and be there with him, but also, was that funny for you? Was that should I do that? Should I not do that? Because there are some
You were a punch-up man.
I was a punch-up guy. I wrote some lines without, taking anything away from the writers there who do the bulk of the work and the actors and the set designers. It is amazing to see what they do. We had to go through 40 scripts. And, when you read something in a script, it's kind of hard to know if it's funny. But then when you put Chloe or, Kate McKinnon or Colin Jost or Che or Mikey Day, these people are phenomenally talented. So all of a sudden the script comes alive. But for the two punch-ups, I got really good. I'll just give you one anecdote because I don't want to get myself in too much trouble.
Were you responsible for besties in the Gen Z hospital script?
No comment on that one.
I thought that as soon as I saw it, I thought of you.
Yeah,
and then the other one that I thought was incredibly well done was Murder Dirter.
Okay, so I had nothing to do with that one, and we thought that one was incredibly dumb. Like when you read it on the script, it was like, is this funny or not? But this is the thing: you add tremendous performance and you add incredible set design. And we were in Brooklyn at 3 a.m, and Elon comes out with that wig on. In a suit, and we just start laughing hysterical, and he just goes right into creepy priest. It was
great.
Hilarious. But
now, what about the Asperger's joke? Because
that was me.
Because you use that as a tease amongst people we may mutually know a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when I heard it, I was like, oh, that's a Jason joke.
So
that's a Jason joke.
That's actually what I'm proud of.
But what's so ironic? No, but what's so ironic is the Asperger's joke came out, and then all these press articles got written saying Elon has admitted publicly to having Asperger's, and we are so proud of him, and it is such a moment to come clean about having this thing. And it was like a Jason
Shocker.
joke this Jason joke that became a gosh, what a.
I'll tell you, I'm particularly proud of that one because here's how that one went down. They had an idea to do Jeopardy, and it was probably the flattest pitch because it's like 11 o'clock at night, a writer comes in and says, we want to do Jeopardy auditions, and it's a kind of a feature for the cast to do auditions. I don't know if you ever saw the Star Wars auditions or the Jurassic Park auditions. It's kind of in that vein. So I was like, for me, I was like, oh, that sounds like it's got potential, but it was a very dry pitch. They didn't have any examples. And when they actually did it, it was like really weird characters that were obscure. So I had pitched my own version of Jeopardy, and Elon had his version of Jeopardy. Elon's version of Jeopardy was Dictator Jeopardy, which was Kim Jong-un, MBS, Putin, et cetera. And then I was like, how to deal with your adversaries. And he was like, for 800. And he's like, plutonium. And I was like, genocide. And, it got really dark. And so we are laughing our asses about that. But then there were security concerns. Basically, we're kind of dialing this around. It would be as funny as it would be a direct correlation of funny to the chances of Elon being assassinated by one of those people. So then we decided maybe we don't do that one. And I said, I've got a great idea. Asperger's Jeopardy. And it would be Zuck, Elizabeth Holmes, which Chloe from the show, who's an absolute genius, incredibly sweet. And she really engaged deeply with Elon and connected with our team. And then obviously Elon. And so you'd have Elon playing Zuck, somebody playing Elon, and then Chloe playing Elizabeth Holmes. And they would be like, how to deal with an intense situation with an employee, and then presses don't make eye contact, and so one of the writers, I could tell she was not happy about this. And she says, listen, my husband has Asperger's, my two brothers have Asperger's. And all of a sudden we're in okay, we
can't offend anyone land.
We can't offend anybody land. And I would say, 80, 90% of the staff is very, like, let's go for it. And then there's probably 10 or 20 who are very sensitive to different topics. And so there's a little navigation you have to do there. But we really want, and then so Elon goes, I have Asperger's. And, like the whole room is like, wow. So then I was workshopping with somebody and I wasn't in the writer's room. I contributed 2%, that max, other than, being Elon's friend and supporting him. But, they came in and said, hey, when they didn't want to ask Elon something, they came to me and I negotiated some situations. Like they didn't originally want to have any Doge father or any cryptocurrencies on the show. We had to negotiate that.
Oh my God.
Well, I mean, no, they have general counsel there. They have standards. They're now on at 8:30.
Well, now we know why the show's not funny anymore. There's too many people with a veto.
I love the show. I think it's very funny.
Well, Elon made it culturally relevant for the first time in like a decade. But what you're describing is too many people with a veto right over the content of the show. That's what makes it not funny. You got to be willing.
No. I think the show is very funny. I think they take some artistic risk, and what's not funny to us might be like funny to some other folks. So that's why it's hit or miss. But certainly moving the show from 11:30 on the West Coast definitely has an impact. So what they could have done 10 years ago before the timing was synced between the West and East Coast is different. They're now on in prime time.
There's still a big cultural shift that's happened. It's like,
but anyway,
sexist,
I'll give you the two best moments.
It's not John Belushi anymore when the corporate CEO comes on the show and wants to do crazier, wilder stuff than the people, who are the regulars. But anyway, keep going.
So anyway, one of the folks who's working on the monologue, comes in and the original monologue, all these things go from rough to potential to good to great to amazing. And so for me, it was, just you guys know my career choice. It just really made me think like, maybe I picked the wrong career choice because I'm pretty fucking good at this. I should do this. So I was talking to Colin at the after party. I was like, I've kind of made my money already. Is there any chance I can get an internship? He's like, no.
But it's okay, Jason. You can always take credit for being the third or fourth writer on Elon's monologue.
Perfect.
Forever.
Exactly. That'd be great. So anyway, they're doing they said they wanted to do an Asperger's joke. I said, so I wrote the Asperger joke of, hey, I just want to let people know I've got Asperger's. And so there's not going to be a lot of eye contact tonight. So if you see me looking off screen, it's not that I'm looking at cue cards. It's just that I have Asperger's. So they didn't keep the cue card part, but they kept the rest of it. And then they did the OJ joke, which was written by Colin Jost, who is absolutely phenomenal as a human, just as a writer and a collaborator. And we spent a lot of time with Colin Jost. He came in and they had this joke about OJ having been on in 79 and 96. The 96 was a joke. He wasn't actually on in 96. I think that's when he went to jail or something. And I said to him, I don't think people understand the joke. They actually think he was on in 96. He goes, well, let's just rehearse it. So we're in the green room rehearsing it. And Elon goes, so hey, and like OJ, like I'm smoking weed on every podcast. That's like saying OJ, he murdered once and now he's a murderer forever. And side note, he was on in 79 and 96. And I just go like this, and he killed both times. And the room, there's like a silence, and then everybody goes hysterical. It's like one of my, poker asides.
Yeah,
when I drop a joke and I take a sip of my wine.
That's fabulous.
So I drop it.
I bet there was like a split second where everyone looks left and right. It's like, is it okay to laugh?
No, that's my point. Like, is it okay to laugh at this?
Yeah.
And Colin Jost just looks at me and goes, that's getting in there. And so I landed that one. So there were, some moments like that. For me, I tell you, I'll get emotional talking about it. It's one of the happiest times I've ever seen in Elon's life, and I've been with him for 20 years. Actually, you've known him for 25, obviously. And the feeling of Monday and Tuesday that, oh my God, this could be a complete, utter disaster. I mean, that was our fear. And that like, we're just not in sync here. And maybe it's going to be unfunny, and this is a huge mistake. Like that was kind of our vibe from our squad. And we had 3 of us there, including Elon. And then, the Asperger jokes lands, and I tell you, a woman from wardrobe comes in and she's crying. She's crying. And she says, she sees me first, and she had been there when we were doing the joke, and she said, my son, was beat up for having Asperger's, and, this changes everything.
Wow.
Just
so it became like a serious thing.
3 or 4 people came in to the room, I kid you not, crying.
Oh my God.
Because 1 in 20 boys, I think, now have Asperger's.
Do you guys remember In Living Color? Do you remember that show from the early 90s?
Yes. Oh my God.
Can you juxtapose like like Comedy Today and Comedy from In Living Color, where they had like Damon Wayans as like the homeless guy, and like everything that would be so like non-PC today and like totally inappropriate, and how much things have shifted where like even the joke becomes like, you know, a serious kind of...
Can I ask a question? Sorry, Jason, when people were getting emotional, it was because of why? They were like, thank you for validating it, putting it out there and showing a role model? Is that it?
One of the Squawk Alley guys, you know, basically got choked up twice on Monday. And he said, Elon can do no wrong in my mind now because I'm dealing with a son who has Asperger's, and they do something sometimes that can be very challenging as a parent, right? And it explains a lot about, and we all know people who have Asperger's, David's, and we know people who have it further on the spectrum. And
as someone who's been accused of being on the spectrum, can I speak to this issue? I mean,
yes.
Like, look, if anything, Asperger's is correlated with an extreme ability to focus and to be successful. That's why there's so many people in tech who have Asperger's or have been accused of having Asperger's. So I don't know that it's something that people have to be, I guess, unless you have like an extreme case, like on the kind of in the autistic part of the spectrum. But like mild Asperger's probably is correlated with success because it's like the opposite of ADD, right? It's an extreme ability to focus. But honestly, like what you're describing to me sounds so lame. Like this is why the show's not funny anymore. It's not about the jokes. Look, it should be about the jokes.
I disagree 100%. That joke landed. It made everybody laugh. It may have landed a little too close to somebody.
Hold on, guys, just to disinterest. The reason, David, you're saying this is because we all know, at least the three of us, four of us, what did not make it and what's on the cutting. That's why you're saying it. And so I think you have to just kind of move on.
I can't say what didn't make it to the cutting room floor, but I will tell you what, I will reveal one skit that made it to rehearsals.
You cannot.
I can. It's just one. I mean, there was one they recorded, which I think will come out as a digital short. And the premise is FOMO capital, fear of missing out capital.
That was good.
And
that was a good one.
That was your idea or Elon's?
I'm trying to remember where it originated. We were just talking about, you know, just the state of like people buying NFTs and everything. And I think Elon may have said like they all have FOMO. And then I was like, yeah, I'd be like a venture capital firm and then he named it FOMO Capital. So it was a little bit of a collaboration, but I think mostly Elon in that one. And this person comes in and the skit is hilarious. So they're probably going to release it as a digital short, like cut for time, but release it. And the person comes in and there's like an associate who's being trained. And they're like, welcome to FOMO Capital, where we never say no to nothing. And he's like, okay, I don't know if I understand that. Like, sit down, you'll get the hang of it. And then people come in with increasingly ridiculous ideas. And I'll just tell you one of them, which was a woman comes in, goes, so you guys know Impossible Meats? This is Impossible Vegetables. These taste just like vegetables, but this broccoli is made with endangered white rhinos. And she takes a bite of it. Tastes just like broccoli. And Elon goes, this is amazing. And they hand them a Picasso. And then somebody comes in and says like, oh, blah, 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 blah. It's just hilarious. It's just more money being
Why didn't that get in the show?
Well, what they do is they do a 2-hour show with a live audience and they just take out 2 or 3 skits. And so there were 3 skits, I think, that were taken out for time. And then those could be released digitally now. So they just want to have extra.
They did a long opening. They did I think it was like 10 minutes on the Mother's Day
one. Yeah.
Can I just say Miley Cyrus has the most incredible voice. Oh my God. I could listen to her sing
forever.
She has got an incredible voice.
So I
thought the opening was really shaky. I mean, I was there. This is the first time I've watched live TV in like 10 years, ever since Apple TV was invented. I'm sitting there waiting for Elon to come out and crush the monologue. And then Miley Cyrus does this long, unfunny thing with all these mothers. It's great, you know.
It's meant to be heartwarming.
First of all, David, it's not a thing. It was a song. It was a song.
But that's called the song, David.
It was a WTF moment for me. I was like, where is Elon? Bring out Elon. I am not here to see a bunch of mothers. I mean,
that's an interesting. I'll tell you, that was an interesting moment, David, because they were like, Elon, we'll put you in like 4 of the skits out of the 7, and Elon, we don't want to work, Elon too hard. So I was doing these sort of sidebars with some of the producers. One in particular who is just a phenomenon. She's an amazing producer who just gets everything done, because this all occurs from Monday to Saturday, and they work 16, 18 hours a day. And, she said, we don't want to take up too much of his time, so we think 4 is the right number. And I said, he gave up the week. He's the busiest guy in the world, arguably. He wants to be in every skit. And she's like, well, nobody really does that. Maybe a comedian here or there. And Elon just said, if I'm here, use me. I want to be in every skit. And we had to reshuffle the deck a bit, and he was willing to do anything, including Wario or, wear a costume or be the creepy priest. Elon was funny.
I think he surprised everyone in terms of being a performer. Just in terms of his performance, I think it was really strong. It was as good as someone who's in the entertainment business would be, I think.
I think that's even his critics, take.
Yeah, exactly. It's a universal take. Even Elon's sort of haters had to concede that he performed well. He kind of committed to all those roles, even when it was poking fun at himself.
Yeah, I had to dunk on Professor Dummy Galloway, who was like, I'm going to live tweet Elon, and he's just going on CNN talking about Elon. He's going on every fucking cable channel he can to ride Elon's coattails. And he tweeted Tesla would lose 80-90% of its value 2 years ago. Are you kidding me? But I agree. Even someone like Professor Galloway, who said Tesla was worthless, he's now just all over it, and it humanized him, which is nice. I think he did a great job, and it was fun.
I'm super happy for him.
Yeah, Lauren Michaels came in and said, "Elon, you did a great job. Come back anytime, sincerely." And I said, "How about next year?"
You're his agent. You're like his agent.
Basically,
what are we making a sequel?
And he's the punch-up guy. He's the agent. He's the hype man.
The negotiator. I was doing mostly negotiation, and Laura Michael said, "Absolutely, Jason. We'd love to have Elon back. You absolutely crushed it." And Elon's busy in the green room.
By the way, do we know what the ratings were?
Third best show of the season so far, I think, not counting all the YouTube views and the international views. I think Chappelle's the only person who beat him.
And look, I think a couple of those skits are going to live forever, I think, on YouTube. I mean, the Chad skit in particular was really hit it out of the park. By the way, my observation on the skits were the ones where Elon was kind of indispensable were really great. Like the Chad thing, and I thought that the Western
Wario.
one where Laron, where he plays this 18th century Old West version of himself. It's this genius in the Old West who's telling them to ride electric horses or something.
Yeah.
For me, that was really funny. So I thought the ones where Elon was sort of indispensable, the more indispensable Elon was to the skit, I thought the better it was. And then some of the skits, look, live sketch comedy is very hit or miss. I thought the ones that were more miss were the ones where they could have done them without Elon. It could have been a skit, any SNL. And it's kind of
I think it's accurate.
Yeah, it's why wouldn't you take advantage of having Elon there and
they did. And just to the staff, first off, I'm sorry I was such a ruckus and such a disruptor in the space. But really, what a great time. Elon had a great time. The after party was amazing.
Describe the after party. Were they wearing masks?
Ooh, that's a good segue. That's a good segue. That's good.
No, it was outside.
No,
I'll just leave it as a good
outside.
segue. It was an outside party. But we danced until, this is actually for real. And I think it's a good segue into just what we're seeing out there. I left San Francisco having been yelled at somebody because my mask fell off. I didn't know it. And I had gone into, a store and they were like, "Your mask!" And they yelled it across the store, and I was like, "Oh, sorry." It was just kind of, how when they fall off, you don't notice it. Then I got to Austin. And when I'm in Austin, I'm walking down the street. I'm the only person in Austin wearing a mask. And somebody points at me and goes, "You don't have to wear that mask, son." And I was like, "Oh," and I look around, there's nobody wearing a mask. It's my first day there. And he goes, "You've been vaccinated?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You really don't need to wear a mask." So I take the mask off. I get to Florida. A friend of mine was out, having a cocktail at a bar, invites me to meet him for a cocktail. I go to meet him for a cocktail. There's a DJ and there's 200...
He who shall not be named.
Anyway, I went to have a cocktail, as one does in Miami. There's 100, 200 people in the club. The only people wearing masks are the staff who are wearing them as chin guards. And I'm like, that's not the purpose of a mask, but okay. So, and then I get to New York, and everybody in New York is wearing 1 or 2 masks on the street. I walked down an empty street.
Okay, so we should talk about that CDC article that was in the New York Times, because that's an incredible summary, Jason, of this whole issue in a nutshell, which is it's unbelievable.
And then to just give Saturday Night Live a nod, every day everybody tested. You got 2 tests, like I forget the names of them now since I stopped taking them. But you did like the big one and the small one. Every day you got tested. Every day you got wristbands. You had to wear a mask 100% of the time. And then when you were in the studio, you had to wear the glass shield. So if you saw the picture I did of myself and Elon and Blood Pop, Michael, who's a famous producer for Justin Bieber, and Lady Gaga, who's a friend of ours, Mike had to wear it too. So Elon had a mask on because he had to take it off to do skits. But all the rehearsals, everybody was masked up, including the actors. And everybody was vaccinated. So they really are taking this seriously. And I understand, because in New York, they had a ton of people die. And to get my understanding, this is what I heard secondhand, was that Lorne Michaels had to get a special variance to keep Saturday Night Live on the air from, the governor and the mayor, and everybody had to sign off on it. But I tweeted,
This is not taking COVID seriously. This is basically an irrational fear of COVID.
Well, because they got hit the hardest, David. So I think that they got hit the hardest. And I tweeted, why is everybody wearing a mask in New York? And of course, I got like 100 because there's a pandemic. But then what the 2 reasons that made sense were so many people died and there was so much suffering in New York that people, out of a sign of respect, are still wearing them until they hit herd immunity officially, which I know you could roll your eyes at, David. But, they did have it would be the equivalent.
I don't think that's the real reason.
No, well, anyway, I do think it's the real reason, because multiple people said to me, it's a way of showing people that you actually care about them and that you're going to really take this seriously until the end.
No, I think it's more what Ezra Klein said, which is this is the red MAGA hat for Team Blue. This is pure virtue signaling.
Possible. The other thing they said was, on a practical basis, in New York, you're on the subway, your office, and in going into a cafe, you have to wear it, and you're doing that 17 times a day. So taking the mask on and off just becomes less work than just leaving it on. Those were reasonable answers I got. But anyway, somebody summarized the story.
Another reason, I think, is that, look, if you're in a blue part of the country, the media sources for Team Blue are still promoting this idea that outdoor spread is a thing, that it's a risk. We're finally now getting. I mean, we've known since last summer that there were no documented cases of casual outdoor spread anywhere in the world. The Atlantic was reporting on this, okay? This is not a conservative publication. This is a skew liberal publication.
Liberal leaning.
Yes, exactly. So we've known since last summer. I mean, when Gavin Newsom declared that we weren't allowed to go to the beach, it was widely mocked. And so only now is the CDC getting around to loosening its guidance on outdoor mask wearing, but it's still not loose enough. And so there was a great article by David Leonard in the New York Times that just came out, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, about the cautious CDC. And what he said is, by the way, this just validates everything we've been saying on the pod for the last few months. Leonard chronicles the sort of absurdly conservative guidance given by the CDC. Basically, the CDC continues to suggest that outdoor transmission accounts for up to 10% of cases, when the real number is certainly under 1%, is probably under 0.1%. And this is all based on a single study in Singapore where that was misclassified. It was based on a construction site that really wasn't even an outdoor spread. And yet the CDC still insists that unvaccinated people need to wear masks outdoors, that vaccinated people wear them in large public venues, and that children at summer camp wear them at all times. This is the current CDC guidance. And so yesterday, when the head of the CDC was pulled in front of a congressional hearing and asked about this, she doubled down on this less than 10%. And the reason why it's so misleading is, technically speaking, less than 10% is correct. But when the real number is 0.001% or something like that, it's highly misleading to give 10%. And the
line in the article, which I loved, is it is accurate to say that sharks eat less than 200,000 humans a year, but it is also more accurate to say sharks attack 150 humans a year.
Right.
And 150 is very different than 200,000. But if you say sharks attack, 200,000 people or less a year, you would think that it's a much bigger problem than it actually is. And I think that's the whole point, which is we we're not being scientific. We're being emotional and reactive.
And the paper that Leonard references, basically they took this data that identified how spread was occurring empirically and identifying, through tracing, where are people actually picking up COVID. And that's really where this empirical evidence suggests we're talking about a less than 0.1% casual outdoor spread rate. And you can see that empirically in the data. But then there's also this deterministic kind of approach where you could say, like, look, how does spread happen? Spread happens with viruses. We know that viruses need to live in liquid in order to survive when you're outdoors. If there's any amount of wind or UV light, the virus can very quickly degrade. The protein can degrade. The RNA doesn't transfer. And so there's a deterministic scientific rationale for why that may be the case. And this evidence that this paper, which I've now shared, kind of gathers together shows that, that is indeed what the statistics are showing. And so, yeah, you're right. But I think the precautionary principle, David, is where the argument would be made on the other side, which is, what's the cost of wearing a mask if there's any risk at all? And by the way, I'm not making this case personally, but I think that's where a lot of people would make the counter argument, rather than debate the facts and the evidence and the science. They would say, but who cares? It's just a mask. Why does that matter? And so I think the question is, why does it matter, right? Like, why does it matter if they're telling us to wear masks? Is there really that much of a cost to people to do that?
Well, I mean, if people are doing it voluntarily, that's their right to do so. But the question is mass mandates. Should we continue to have mandates on the population for something that isn't necessary? And look, I was one of the first people in March of 2000 to call for mask wearing and mask mandates because we were seeing the data out of the Asian countries showing that they were effective. They were high cost or high benefit, low cost. So I was in favor of it when there was a pandemic raging. But when T0, the rate of transmission, is in free fall everywhere, and now we've learned that outdoor spread is not an issue, I don't support restricting people's freedom. And for a reason that's not rooted in science. And, the problem with the CDC guidance is that people really act on it. So you've got politicians, you've got local jurisdictions who will
you have schools.
You have schools. I mean, so the schools have remained closed. And by the way, the schools have been open in Texas and Florida for 6 months. We know, based on empirical data in the real world, seeing what's happening in Texas and Florida, that you're not seeing an increase in COVID cases in those places because of school reopening. And yet the CDC has not moved its guidance on school reopening. You have summer camps now that, for liability reasons, will make kids wear masks because they can't take the risk of getting sued. And then you've got politicians like Gavin Newsom who won't wipe their ass without the CDC's permission to do so. So it has a real consequence in the real world that the CDC is stuck on this ridiculous guidance.
Did we read the actual sentence from the New York Times about under 10%? So
no, you can read it because it's really sad, actually.
Just in terms of the misleading CDC numbers, they said, in quotes, under 10% of the spread has occurred outside, when in reality, the share of transmission that occurred outdoors seems to be below 1% and maybe below 0.1%, multiple epidemiologists told me.
Right. Well, also read the quote. This is directly from David Leonard in the New York Times. And I think it's important to, it's great when you can quote the New York Times or the Atlantic because these are left-leaning publications. So Team Blue should be more willing to accept them. What Leonard said is there's not a single documented COVID infection anywhere in the world from casual outdoor interactions. But do people know that? I mean, do the people walking down the street with masks on know that?
Well, they'll know it now because by the way, did you guys know, Jason just told me this, we accumulate 1 million views / listens a week to our podcast.
Yeah, now the archive's growing. Yeah.
So now 1 million people will at least know. I mean, at least
I think it's it's a good
also,
segue.
It's a little bit self-selective. So let's be honest.
Yeah, for intelligence. I mean,
some of
the people.
No. But the real question is like, isn't this an opportunity for the CDC to actually reestablish some credibility? Which is to say, okay, we're going to get back to facts. We know that people will be prone to acting on anecdote and emotion. So we're going to be grounded in truth and fact. We went back. We looked at the Singapore study. Here are the flaws in it. Here's how it applies. So we're going to own it and revise it. And that would go such a long way. The fact is it's important to understand, like, what do you think the incentives are for them to keep doubling down on bad decision making? There's no downside.
I think I said this. I think I said this a few months ago, which is I don't think that the CDC or any kind of medical, administrative group in particular has to think about the synthesis of the effects of some of the policy that they're recommending. Their objective is to save lives. So if I'm running the CDC, I'm going to tell people, don't leave your home ever. Don't drink alcohol. Don't eat red meat. Exercise. You have to exercise 60 minutes a day or you get taxed. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could see. If you were purely focused on saving lives, you would make specific recommendations only to save lives without thinking about the consequences outside of saving lives. The consequences outside of saving lives of, telling people to wear masks is it minimizes economic activity, some might argue. Therefore, there's going to be an impact on airlines and hotels and outdoor thing and spending and all this other stuff, and people being willing to go to work and people being afraid of being in the office. I mean, I see this across all my companies where people, even though they're vaccinated and they're scientists, they're afraid to go to work. And so, part of the perpetuation of the fear that arises from these policies that are all about the absolute saving of any life is that you end up having a significant cost that's not related to the objectives of that particular medical organization. And we see it around the world. This just goes back to what I said about leadership a few episodes ago, which is the leadership of the administration should be synthesizing the recommendation of that group along with the effect that other groups might be indicating would arise from that recommendation and coming up with a kind of concrete, kind of objective around, okay, well, how do we balance these different effects?
What you're saying is absolutely correct. The people who are making the decisions are only thinking about their responsibility. So it's like a Secret Service agent when the president's like, can I go out and sign autographs? Like, absolutely not. They're going to say no because they are responsible for keeping the president alive. Now, the other pernicious thing about this is they kept trying to game the public. And the public, when you try to game the public and you get caught where they say, Fauci says, don't wear a mask because he doesn't want to run out of masks. Then they say, keep the masks on because they want to, virtue signal or whatever it is. Or they won't simply say the vaccine is not dangerous or that the vaccine is actually going to keep you from dying. They undersold the vaccine. And now everybody's going to question everything they do for all time. Don't manage us. Manage the facts. Stop trying to manage people and just start managing your communication and make it crisp and clear. And then somebody has to be a goddamn leader and say, okay, the doctors are saying this, the economy is saying this, and here's how those two things overlap. And schools being closed means more suicide in kids, more depression in kids, and people not being able to put food on their tables means we're going to create who knows what this economic policy is going to create, which is another segue. David, you had something to say.
Well, look, I agree with that, but I think you guys are being a little bit too charitable to the CDC. It's not just that they're wrong, and it's not just that they have a bureaucratic incentive for CYA and to be too conservative in their guidance. It's the fact that when an error gets pointed out, like by David Leonard in the New York Times, they double down on the lie. And so Leonard followed up his article. It happened. So go to this tweet that I just put in the chat. He said, at a Senate hearing today, Senator Collins asked CDC Director Dr. Walensky about today's edition of Morning, which was his article, which explains why the CDC's claim that less than 10% of COVID transmission is misleading. And Walensky then doubles down and has a bunch of excuses and basically defends this 10% number, which is a lie. Now, why would the CDC be doing this? There is separate reporting by the New York Post. Go to this article on teachers' unions collaborated with the CDC on school reopenings. So this guidance that the CDC put forward on school reopenings, the teachers' unions were part of writing that guidance, and all of their suggestions were actually accepted and incorporated by the CDC. Now, how is this science? This is politics. Last year, there were a bunch of articles accusing the Trump administration of incorporating, political considerations into their guidance. There were huge scandals about this. Where is the reporting today about the influence that the teachers' unions are wielding over the CDC to deliberately keep schools closed, even though the science does not support that? This is a gigantic scandal, and yet no one's covering it. It's left for the New York Post to cover this instead of the New York Times.
By the way, I think this is a good transition to that Druckenmiller interview because, Sachs, I just retweeted what you had sent, which was a link to the video. interviews. So, Stanley Druckenmiller is this incredible investor, the GOAT.
GOAT, GOAT.
There's many stories about Druckenmiller. At one point, he's the guy that notoriously, they say, broke the Bank of England, where he was betting against the British pound and forced the central bankers in the UK to devalue the pound. And he's made billions of dollars managing initially George Soros's money, and then spun off and runs his own money now as an investor. And so he's a macro guy. So he thinks about kind of macroeconomic conditions and effects, and he talks a lot about Fed policy. So he gave this interview on CNBC, and I think the most kind of prescient quote, and it was also based on an op-ed he wrote, right, Sachs, in the Wall Street Journal?
Yeah. But the interview is fantastic. The TV interview is great. Just watch that.
The interview is great. And he said, in the write-up, he said, clinging to an emergency after the emergency has passed is what the Fed behavior indicates right now. And I think that, kind of what we're talking about broadly is perhaps the emergency in the United States, where you have this uncontrolled increase in COVID cases. That's not the case today. So the emergency has passed. We still have COVID, but it is not an emergency. And the point is, there's a lot of institutions and individuals and businesses that are still operating as if we were in the throes of the emergency. And so Druckenmiller is making the case that the Fed and the Fed policy is acting as if we're in an emergency. But broadly, we're seeing this across a lot of institutions like the teachers' unions and others, where people are effectively, never let a good emergency go by without taking advantage, or whatever the saying is.
Never waste a crisis.
Never waste a crisis. And keep the crisis going is kind of the model everyone's in right now, which is like,
the crisis.
Totally.
Milk the crisis.
They're keeping it going as long as they can. And Druckenmiller gave some pretty amazing quotes. He said that, well, first of all, he described our current monetary fiscal policy as being the most radical he had ever seen. And this guy's been watching markets for decades. The Fed has pumped $2.5 trillion of QE into the economy, post-vaccine, post-retail recovery. He said that right now, retail demand is 5 years above trend, meaning not only has retail demand fully recovered, it's where, if you look at the trend line, it would be 5 years from now. So they are pumping demand like crazy. They've issued $6 trillion of new debt. And then this is the thing I didn't know at all. He said the Fed is buying 60% of new debt issues. Without this, the bond market would be rejecting this massive fiscal expansion because interest rates would become prohibitive. And he said that when interest rates revert to the norm, the historical norm, interest expense on our debt will be 30% of the government budget. So, think about that.
Look, the markets have had to intervene, and we have essentially decoupled what the government thinks is happening with what the capital markets needs people to know. And that's a really unique dynamic. I'm not nearly as successful as Stan or have been in the markets as long as him, but in my 20 years, this is the first time I've really seen that. So just to give you a sense of this, the markets are now acting to establish inflation expectations that the Fed just seems to not want to do anything about. And just to give you guys a sense of this, when in February, the markets really kind of had its first capitulation, what happened was that all of a sudden people digested all these facts that Stan just said and realized, wait a minute, all of this money is going to drive prices higher. And so what they did was they took the yield on the 10-year bond up by 100 basis points. And the markets freaked out. They went from 0.75 to 1.75. And the Fed came out and said, hey, hold on, nothing to see here. Everything's going to be fine. But then everything since then has been sort of leading to this realization. Commodity prices are up 50%. There's this kind of joke that you see a bed of lumber moving across a railroad. It's $1 billion of lumber just because of how expensive it is. There are shortages everywhere. You'll be shocked to know that today, Chipotle put out the following guidance, which is they said they are increasing the minimum wage to $15 and that within 3 years, you can make $100,000 a year at Chipotle.
Yeah.
That is as much as some engineers and coders in the United States. Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber, said on the Uber earnings call last week that the average hourly rate that some drivers in New York, Uber drivers in New York, were getting paid was $38 an hour.
What?
$38 an hour. So what does all of this mean? I think what Stan is trying to say—
$100,000 a year.
But we're in this weird place where we've decoupled the government institution that's responsible for fiscal stability, and then the overall capital markets used to work in tandem, and they're no longer working in tandem because you have a narrative and a set of data points that aren't supported by the facts. And so this is an interesting thing. So in the CDC versus the American people example, there's no way to push back, right? I mean, governors can act independently, cities will act independently, but at the end of the day, the teachers' unions are working with the CDC, the school camps have this guidance, and you're stuck in this morass. In the capital markets, that's not necessarily true. And so you can change and you can re-rate asset prices based on sentiment. And I think what everybody is saying in this example is we're past the emergency. We've put too much money in the economy. We need to reopen, and we now need to face the fact that there are massively rising prices, which means that there will be inflation. And if you don't act, the capital markets will continue to act for us. And so this is an example today where you're just seeing a bloodbath in the markets. And by the way, the only time that two government officials tried to be on the either side, Janet Yellen last Friday kind of casually in an interview, kind of put her toe out in the water as Treasury Secretary and kind of said something that said there could be inflation, and literally was hand slapped and had to put out something that disavowed her comments less than 24 hours later. So that's where we are.
There's a bloodbath in the markets today, and there's been one for the last couple of months. And in particular, all the growth stocks have been hammered. And just to build on what you're saying, Chamath, so there's an announcement today. There's some data that the inflation, the CPI, is up 4% and climbing. And so people are now pricing in big interest rate increases. And so that makes growth stock, that hammers growth stocks because all the earnings are in the distant future. And so they get now discounted at a higher rate. And so the valuations get absolutely hammered. So, it's absolutely souring. The markets are basically souring on this Biden agenda. And, I'm beginning to wonder if Biden's going to be a Jimmy Carter here, because frankly, all he had to do was leave things well enough alone. COVID was winding down. We had a vaccine. All they had to do was distribute it to as many people as possible, end COVID, let the recovery take shape. And instead, they pushed this insane $10 trillion agenda of taxes and spending that are now overstimulating the economy, that are causing inflation, that are now creating interest rate increases.
No, that's not true yet. Meaning, he did do a good job on the vaccine, David. But then to your point, the federal government's posture on reopening has still been stunted. And he's proposing so much more incremental capital, which we all know probably will not be efficiently spent. And there isn't any other good ideas. And so he believes his path to re-election, which is true, is to spend and to put money into the economy.
I think it's going to backfire. I think it's going to backfire massively.
And to tax, right? So he's trying to offset with higher taxes on the wealthy, which, from his point of view, is not going to affect, and the analysis is probably fair, it's not going to affect his voter bloc significantly.
This is going to backfire massively. Look, if the economy turns, we were set for a post-COVID boom. And right now, that is all at risk because, Chamath, like you're saying, they're keeping the economy closed or parts of it way too long. They then overcompensate for that by printing a ton of money, and then they overcompensate for that by raising taxes too much.
Just to build on that, so that second step of they're overcompensating their inability to open with money is so true, because then what happens is your labor force stays impaired because people make enough money by not working.
This is the key issue right now for a lot of businesses. I mean, you have restaurants that are overbooked, cannot get servers. Jim Cramer was saying he's up to $18, per hour per servers. He's going to move it to 20. It won't make a difference because with that extra 300, I think, in federal unemployment, plus 3 to 700, I think, depending on where you are, you're now at 60, 70, 80%. And people are like, well, people will still go to work. And it's like, yeah, but you're saving commuting and you probably have side hustles and you've lowered your commute expense. So what is going to incentivize people to go back to work? We are now running a dry run with cryptocurrency and, stimulus a UBI experiment. And the result of this UBI experiment is negative economic growth or throttled economic growth. We cannot be productive if people don't want to work and contribute.
So just to your point,
we need more
Friday,
people to go to work.
So just to your point on Friday, Montana, which was part of the federal government's, pandemic-related UI benefits program, basically said that we're canceling those benefits and we're opting out. And on top of that, I think they're now offering a $1,200 bonus to return to work. And the problem is because Montana now has a severe labor shortage, but it's not just Montana, it's every state in the union. So we have these two opposing forces, right? We have so much stimulus. We have an undermotivated labor force. We have more taxation that's also just going to be wasted. So very poor ROI. And then now we have input costs going up and prices going up to try to attract people. It's all going to drive price inflation.
Here's the quote from the governor of Mississippi. The purpose of unemployment benefits is to temporarily assist Mississippians who are unemployed through no fault of their own. After many conversations over the last several weeks with Mississippi small business owners and their employees, it has become clear that the pandemic unemployment assistance and other like programs passed by the Congress may have been necessary in May of last year, but are no longer so in May of this year. And can you imagine the hit you're going to take from voters, from woke mobs, from people who believe in income inequality when you say, I think we have to stop sending people free money so they go back to work? Like, this is a very hard position to take. And we now have this occurring on a micro basis in California. We have is it true we have a $75 billion surplus this year as the city devolves? Yeah, and now we're going to take that, and instead of lowering taxes and maybe trying to get Tesla or Oracle or other venture capital firms that have left, instead of doing that, what could we do, David, with that $75 billion?
So great point. So the $75 billion surplus, 1/3 of that is from the federal bailout, which obviously we don't need, and that's the money printing that's coming out of Washington.
So we're giving that back, right, to another state that could use it?
Good luck. Exactly.
Yeah,
no.
Okay.
The other 2/3 is because last year we had all these unexpected tax receipts from the stock market boom. And so you had all these California taxpayers paying capital gains on that. So, but what this highlights to me is, and what I wonder about is how many of those taxpayers have left the state, because we know that we had net migration loss of 182,000 in 2020. So how many of those people left the state and won't be paying taxes this year? And if Biden breaks the stock market through this insane tax and spend, then where is this surplus going to come from next year? And what this highlights to me is I think we have people in Washington and Sacramento, for that matter, who've lost sight of the fact that ultimately the private sector and the public sector are a partnership, because the private sector generates the largesse and the wealth to fund the public sector and to fund the creation of these public goods, to fund education, to fund law and order, to fund social programs. And they've stopped seeing it that way. They see the private sector not as something like a cow to be milked or a sheep to be sheared, but they want to skin the sheep instead of shearing it. And so they're really at risk of killing the golden goose. I guess you could put it that way. And I think that during the Clinton years, just to take a contrast, we had government spending federal government spending as a percent of GDP was between 8.5% and 22%. That was the range. And we had a boom. So when you have a federal spending as a percent of GDP around 20%, it works, right? And that doesn't mean you can't increase government spending. It just means that government spending will increase as the economy gets bigger. But what you have now is federal spending over 30% of GDP, and everything is starting to break. That's the problem.
Very, very big problem.
And of course...
And that's why we're all getting red-pilled, right? How many people in Silicon Valley, frankly, who make a living off growth stocks are now starting to scratch their heads going, gee, what did I vote for?
It's definitely becoming a thing. And I would say the purple pill party, chop it up. Let's mix these two things. Let's candy flip, whatever it takes, to get out of this. We got to get this party restarted.
Centrism is the answer.
It absolutely is. And,
centrism is the answer.
I think it's probably good for us to take a pause here and maybe talk about this Business Insider hit piece, or what was likely to be a hit piece, but turned out, I think, on the margin fair, calling this All In podcast. And I don't know if this is accurate, but I thought it was pretty funny. Possibly the single most disruptive clique in California politics this year. I think they're referring to the four of us. And then, of course, I get absolutely skewered for making clucking noises. I own those clucks. I'm proud of those clucks.
Here's what I'll say. Can I say something? I think that, look, I don't know, I'm a little exhausted about local politics and California politics. I'm not exhausted by federal politics because I think it's an important lens, as David said, into like how we actually conduct business, because all of the businesses we're involved with are inherently global, and America leads. Here's what I'll say though about that article, which I didn't read, like most of these things, which I don't really read.
Never read your press. Rule number 1 in the game.
I think it's incredibly important to realize that California was a bellwether for opportunity and the ideals of American upward mobility. And a lot of people came here irrespective of the taxes because they sought out like-minded people. They sought out a moderate liberal viewpoint and an economic set of opportunities. 2 of those 3 boundary conditions are changing. And that's why I think California is now important, because it is a canary in the coal mine for the rest of the United States, which is, do we become a balkanized country of 50 states? Or are there like generic, progressive, moderate ideals that everybody can agree to and sign up to, and where governments largely still get out of the way? I don't think, if you look at sort of like tech oligopolists and the hatred we have for them, I don't think political oligopolists are any better. And so, I don't think we want either of them in charge is really the answer.
I think that's a great point.
So we just got to use this election cycle, I think, to kind of like vote a moderate agenda. The most disruptive thing that can happen in California is somebody emerges who is rational and moderate, who says, you can categorize me as a Republican or a Democrat on a whole bunch of issues. I had to pick a platform because this stupid election model makes me pick one. So call me a Democrat or call me a Republican, but the reality is I'm a centrist. Here's what I believe. And if that person gets voted in, then hopefully it changes the conversation for the rest of the country. Otherwise, we are headed to 50 balkanized states operating independently. And Jason, the thing where you make a joke is actually kind of sad. If you get $25 billion and you don't need it, the ideal thing is that you actually give it back to the federal government because you think there's some accountability for all these dollars and it actually is the right thing to do. And the fact that everybody laughs because we know, no, of course not. We'd rather just dig a ditch and fill a ditch for $25 billion or, 2.5 miles of high-speed rail, whatever the crazy thing is. That's kind of sad. And
it's sad and it's corrupt, right? It's a corruption. It's a corruption that we've just gotten used to, which is you're going to take $26 billion that you don't need, that you don't deserve. It's like the school board in San Francisco announcing they're going to open school for one day to qualify for incentives for reopening that Gavin Newsom gave them for $12 million. It's a pure money grab. It's outrageous. It's all about the Benjamins for these guys, and by that I do not mean students named Benjamin.
Wow, there you go, folks. David Sachs punching it up on the next SNL. I wonder why Elon didn't invite you to come with him.
I'm going to stick with I'm not as good as you, Jason. I'm going to stick with my day job. But can we go back to this article? I want to give you my 2 cents on this article. I did, it was behind a paywall, so it was hard to read, but I got a copy of it. Here's my view on it. First of all, I think they did pull their punches a little bit because we did the pre-buttal. We called them out before based on their very biased list of questions they sent me. But in any event, they kind of pulled their punches a little bit. But the article was kind of suffused with this how dare they pissiness, and in a couple of areas. One was, the reporter was very upset that we're going direct, right? We've talked about going direct, meaning going around reporters and speaking directly to the public. It's kind of, well, how dare they do that? They should be talking through us, we, the objective reporters, and then we'll tell the story for them. No, we're going direct. We want to have an influence. We want to speak our minds. And the second thing they're upset about is the fact that we're contributing to these elections. And the reporter made a point of saying that I sought out the Boudin recall. They didn't just come to me. I sought them out and wrote $25,000 as if, what is he really up to? Why did he seek them out? Well, if you want to know what I'm up to, I've written about it. I wrote a blog on, the problem of Chesa Boudin. I've written a blog on how Gavin Newsom has moved very far to the left. You don't need to speculate or wonder what I'm up to. I've spent thousands of words tweeting about it and talking about it.
David, they want you to go through them.
Exactly.
And the fact that this podcast has bigger reach than when we go on CNBC, or bigger reach than we're in Business Insider, and when the New Yorker article on Chamath comes out, more people will listen to this podcast than read that article. That's right. What this is about.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a certain threatening nature to what we're doing here where, as they admit, we're more influential than they are. Well, then why read them? Like, what is the point? Especially if they're doing link baiting, they look dumb when compared to the dialogue we're having here. They can't have the dialogue we're having here. Because let's face it, we're for insiders. We see what's happening on the inside, and if we talk to them, they might get 10 or 20% of the picture, and in aggregate, they might get to 50 or 60, but we get 100%.
Let me connect a couple dots, because I think what you're saying is really important. In my mind, I think this is another example of like the CDC example or the financial markets example, where in all of these cases, what we have is the following dynamic, which is like, if you think about when the newspaper used to hit your front door, right? Like you used to wake up and, when the paper was delivered, right? We all remember that. And you'd pick it up and it was a physical paper. Now, I'm just going to use this number to make an example. Let's just say it was 8.5 by 11. You take this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and what you have is a fixed container. And so what there was inherent competition. And so inherently, you had this leverage where it was only the best things that got into the paper, right? They segregated by sections. People wanted to advertise against it. And having a fixed amount of real estate really made that real estate precious. And I think that was really, really important. Now think about what's happened. When you go to that same paper online, let's just use the New York Times, effectively that container has become infinite. And so now you've completely taken away the ability for anybody to actually assign real value. There's no above the masthead or above the fold concept as much as there used to be, especially in infinite scrolling. The point of all of this is why there's no value in coming back and telling the truth. You just go to the next clickbait title because you just keep on going and you just wonder, hey, wait a minute, to tell the truth is an inconvenient artifact of my business model today. Whereas before, telling the truth was really important. It was an anchor which created more value for you to sell ads. Now it just gets lost in a sea of things.
There's such an agenda.
So the point is, the financial markets in this interesting way is it's one of the few places left where you can vote in real time about the truth, right? And so, for example, you get all of these readings and you get all of these documents from the Fed, which is the financial markets version of the CDC, but you can vote that you don't believe them. And you can see it every day, the gap between what they say is narrative and what the facts are. And that's a really healthy dynamic that still exists in finance and capital markets. We just need to figure out a way where it exists everywhere else. Otherwise, people will always want to make sure that they have a direct conduit to tell their version of the truth and allow people to decide for themselves.
Before we get to science with Friedberg, if he gets his camera back up and running, I don't know if you guys know, but Vox canceled us this week with an assist from Taylor Lorenz. The funniest, darkest turn in all of this is the multimillionaire VCs co-opting the language of young women, MLM marketers in an effort to seem cool and hip with us. Why white men are using the term besties. I don't know if you saw that.
I think Taylor Lorenz has had her sense of humor surgically removed. I mean, doesn't
internet's
she
hall monitor?
Doesn't she understand that this is a self-deprecating, self-mocking bit that we came up with, or that you came up with? I mean, come on, it's a gag. We know it's funny for 50-year-old guys to be calling each other besties.
Just the reason why, by the way, just if everybody wants to know the origin of that, is one of our other friends, Phil Hellmuth, kept calling me Bestie C. And we used to think it was the dumbest thing that we've ever heard. And then what we thought would be even funnier is to just co-opt it. And it was done
give him no credit.
But it was done initially to make fun of how Muth used to call me.
Right. Well, we used to call Helmuth actually has the maturity level of a teenage girl. So
that's true. That's true. With the name dropping,
when he used the term bestie, he was not using it ironically. Whereas we're using it ironically.
Yeah.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about science so we can keep the Friedberg ratio up for all these Friedberg stands, including whichever maniac is running Friedberg's dog's anonymous Twitter handle. I don't know if you talked to Twitter security about that yet, Friedberg.
My dog's on a walk right now. He'll come back and then he can tweet later as well. It is my dog that runs the account. Yeah.
Yes. So much for our ratings. No tweet. Yeah. What is your dog's name again?
Montgomery Wiggins.
With no Montgomery, this is going to be lowest episode in a long time. But
his name was Wiggins at the SPCA where I adopted him from, and I wanted to name him Monty because he's like a hustler. He hustled his way, from the streets of the Mission into a nice condo in Pack Heights. So I gave him the full name Montgomery. So he's Montgomery Wiggins now. Oh, here he is, Monty. Come here. Come on. Up. Come here. Up.
Come on, Monty. Come on, Monty. Okay, tweet something ironic.
Oh, there he goes, Monty.
Hey, there's a lot going on with synthetic biology. We saw 2 different IPOs in, I believe, the last month or so. Tell us about the Ginkgo Bioworks public offering and the Zymergen IPO.
Zymergen. Well, so the premise of synthetic biology, which dates back, many years, right? Genentech is one of the first companies to effectively use synthetic biology to make products. So, Genentech and Amgen started making these proteins that became biologic drugs. And the way you can kind of think about synthetic biology is the DNA is software, and we can program the software to get the organism of the whatever DNA we're changing to make something that we want to use. And so synthetic biology is all about editing the genome or editing the DNA of an organism, editing its DNA, and doing that in a way that you can kind of make a product. And so this was done initially for biologic drugs. And over the last kind of 20 years or so, using synthetic biology as a kind of approach, we've kind of thought about, well, how can we make things like fuel and increasingly more commoditized products like, proteins that we might consume for animal consumption instead of using animals to make proteins. And so the underlying technologies have all followed an accelerated path that's greater than Moore's law. DNA sequencing costs have dropped faster than Moore's law over the last 10 or 15 years. The ability to synthesize or print DNA, CRISPR, kind of provides us with a set of tools to do much more precise DNA editing, and so on and so forth. And there's just a confluence of technologies, sort of like there were leading up to the personal computing revolution, that are now going to enable this incredible proliferation of a new industry that many argue will rewrite all industrial systems, all industry that makes everything that humans consume, from materials to food to the chemicals to the plastics. Everything that we use in our daily life can be rewritten using synthetic biology. And so the promise of this dates back, again, like 2 decades or so. There was a company called Amyris that John Doerr backed. That was one of the first companies. That was one of the few companies from the original synthetic biology companies that actually survived and made it through. And they're still around. They're still a publicly traded company. And more recently, there have been these kind of more digitally enabled, at least that's the premise that they kind of make for their businesses, companies. So Zymergen, which was, got a bunch of SoftBank money. They raised $1 billion as a private company. They got public with I think 13 or 14 million of revenue, and they're worth $5 billion in their IPO. So they just went public. And this other company called Ginkgo Bioworks, which is a similar sort of, synthetic biology platform company, just went public, or just announced that they're going public via SPAC at a $15 billion market cap with, I think less than 100 million of revenue. So, the game is on. And I think one way to kind of think about this is, these businesses aren't great businesses today, but the promise of the next century being all about synthetic biology, where biology becomes software and you can program biological organisms to make and print pretty much anything we as humans consume, is a premise that everyone believes is going to come to fruition this century. And it will completely reinvent industry, will improve sustainability. I think it is going to be the great savior for this planet and for our ability to sustain on this planet. So these are kind of, two big IPOs that validate that the capital markets are there. There's so many big institutional investors, Chamath can share more on this, that are like backing quote unquote ESG companies. Synthetic biology is this kind of ESG, moment. And I think these two IPOs happening at the valuations that they're happening at and the capital that's going in, I think these are kind of like the Netscape moments for synthetic biology, and we're going to see a tremendous amount happen over the next couple of years.
So Chamath, how close are these from being science projects in a lab to being scalable revenue companies in your estimation? Because these are de minimis amounts of capital we're talking about. So this feels like...
De minimis amounts of revenue.
De minimis amounts of revenue.
Large amounts of capital.
Large amounts of capital. Is this how far is it to actually cross that chasm?
I think that we're still trying to figure out what the right business model for these companies is. So, for example, like if you look at chip design, right? There's an entire value chain where there's the people that manufacture the equipment, right? There's the people that run the factory. There are the people that develop the tool chain, so the software that you can use to characterize and build a chip, right? And if you look at those industries, the factory in the middle tends to be the least valuable. Companies like Verilog, folks that make the software are really important. And then folks that make the equipment, because the equipment is so precise and very complicated, is valuable. If you translate that to biology, we need to sort out where the value is going to be. So the amazing thing about Ginkgo is what its promise is, what the promise that they're going to make to the market is we're going to make biology programmable so that an entire generation of biologists and chemists who would otherwise have not been able to just actually literally like write into a command line interface and generate biologic samples, we're going to be able to enable that the same way an electrical engineer. So for example, when I was doing internships, or you would literally be writing Verilog and it would get, basically generating what was called a net list, and you could send a net list to a fab and all of a sudden out comes a chip. So that's what we're trying to do. The problem that they have to figure out now is, are you a tool provider? Are you, pick and shovels? Are you doing it yourself on balance sheet and taking risk?
Company? Yeah.
Are you a product company? And this is where we're too early to know what the answer is. But as the market sorts that out, as David said, more people will get comfortable applying money. This is why Zymergen and Ginkgo are two really important data points, because as David said, it will force the market to help these companies rationalize where they are and what the tool chain looks like and compare it to semiconductors. And in that, you're going to have an entire generation of companies get built. It's super exciting. I spent time in and around these businesses without getting too specific. And I think they're really compelling, really interesting.
And this is, I don't generally speak my book, but this is where I spend most of my time, right? So I really am making a bet on my career and my capital and my time on synthetic biology and the opportunity it presents for our species this century. So all of the work I do, and I have several businesses that I would say compete with Ginkgo and Zymergen in different ways and are attacking this problem in different ways, which is, I mentioned this last time, but how do you produce enough biological material? How do you make stuff? Once you've got fermenters. And, so are there fermenter tank companies? Are there, cheap fermentation platform companies? Do we need to scale these things up? Do we need to kind of reinvent how they're operating? There's a lot of stuff we need to kind of figure out over the next couple of years for this to really kind of sweep the world. But the fact that we can program biology to make stuff for us is kind of where we're at today. That's the moment.
So here's another example of a fabulous company. This is a private company, but you'll see them in the next probably 3 or 4 years debut as a public business called Pivot Bio, another synthetic biology company, which I think is just masterful. And what essentially Pivot Bio does, it essentially is a clean alternative to synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. So you put this shit in the ground when you're planting seeds. And what it enables is plants that were previously incapable of nitrogen fixation, meaning getting nitrogen out of the soil. They're able to do it. Now, all of a sudden, yields go up, density goes up, predictability of the crops go up. And it's a huge advance for farming.
What's interesting about, so Pivot Bio, like Chamath mentioned, there's a lot of plants like soybeans, legumes that will fix nitrogen. They'll take nitrogen out of the air, right? 70% of the air is nitrogen. And so plants need nitrogen to grow. All protein has to have nitrogen in it. So nitrogen's key to growing plants. Corn, you need to put nitrogen on the ground. So around 6% of global electricity is used to make ammonia, which is the fertilizer that farmers around the world put on their fields to grow their corn. And the ammonia that sits on the field and doesn't get absorbed by the plant turns into nitrous oxide, which is a 300x worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Think about that. 300 times the heat capacity of carbon dioxide when it goes up into the atmosphere. So the environmental effects of nitrogen-based agriculture are awful. And, Pivot is one of the first. They actually commercialized a research microbial strain to do this. And you put it on the seed before you put it in the ground. But now the ability for us to engineer microbes, and the microbes now pull the nitrogen out of the air and stick it into the plant. The ability for us to engineer microbes opens up this universe of possibility where Pivot is kind of like, kindergarten level of what's going to happen over the next couple of years, where we can now engineer all these microbes to pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere and maybe reduce all fertilizer use and have a huge effect on greenhouse gas resulting from agriculture.
A lot of what you've mentioned seems to be things in the world, products that can be improved and refined. What about inside of our bodies? I know there are some efforts to understand what cells are doing and maybe use synthetic biology to get a reading on a molecular or cellular level as to what is going on inside your body. And then there are these self-replicating systems that might be able to, I don't know, if your white blood cells were low, and it was the 80s and it was HIV, you could just, boom, produce more white blood cells with a shot or something.
Well, the original idea of Moderna, which we all know now as being kind of this RNA vaccine producer, was you could put RNA in your body and therefore provide the code to get your cells to make specific proteins that can do things in your body. And so we did this to make this. Well, the example we're using now is the COVID vaccine, right? So it makes the spike protein, which we then develop an immune response to. But the idea with Moderna is you could eventually replace medicine with these RNA shots, and now your cells can start to make specific proteins to do specific things in your body. Now, we're very elementary as a species in our understanding of how proteins drive systems-level biology and outcomes. So we're starting to learn about this. But I will tell you, there's a really interesting research team at UCSF led by a woman named Hana El-Samid. And this research team is identifying, they're building a toolkit of proteins where these proteins can almost have like robotic arms. They can have really interesting function. Think about Martin Short in Inner Space. Remember that machine he went in the body and he started doing stuff in the body? They're working on building basically a toolkit. So it's not just a single protein that now it goes and does something, but really complicated combinations of proteins that can now go in the body and fix things and repair things and react environmentally to specific conditions in the body. Like, oh, there's a cancer cell here. I'm going to go do something to it now. And so there's this whole world of like dynamic, kind of making things more dynamical than they have been historically.
Just thinking about aging, would it theoretically be able to help with hearing loss, eyesight loss, and those type of things? Would you be able to?
There's another area of biology. We could talk about this at length, but there's another area of biology called stem cell therapy, where you can basically take, all cells evolve from stem cells in your body. So these are kind of the original cells that you have initially in an embryo, right? And then as your body kind of grows, you end up with these stem cells. And you have stem cells in your body today. Those stem cells, when they make a copy, they can differentiate into different cells in your body. So for the last, 10, 20 years, and California, by the way, has about a $4 billion, if I remember right, stem cell grant program where they're funding research into stem cell therapies. So there are significantly successful therapies right now. Multiple companies are productizing and launching, and they're already active in the market for fixing blindness with people that have specific diseases called retinitis pigmentosa, where the retinal cells in your body, in your eyes, degrade and stop working. You will get a stem cell injection of progenitor retinal stem cells into your eye, and you will grow a new retina and you can see again. And the efficacy is insane. It is incredible how well this works. And they are doing this with lots of other stem cell therapies. So we're getting so smart. And here's an incredible thing scientists discovered a few years ago, and I think these guys won the Nobel Prize for this. You could take any cell in the human body and induce it chemically, meaning you put a bunch of chemicals on that cell, and get that cell to convert back into a stem cell. Now you've created your own stem cells from your own body, and you can now put them back in your body and get them to turn into any other cell in your body. So this is called induced pluripotent stem cell therapy, iPSC. So iPSC now forms the basis for a lot of these stem cell therapy kind of programs that are underway. And so this is going to be an insane field over the next couple of decades.
Hey, Friedberg, if we took the $25 billion that we don't need in California and gave it to these companies, how quickly could we survive?
Totally.
How quickly could we solve this problem?
Nothing drives me more nuts than when I see money not going to science. I mean, it is just nuts.
Seriously, we need to start our own political party that is based on reasonable suggestions, like the one I just made, or the ones, the
middle ground party.
Just a reasonable party.
Sachs, do you think there's possibility for a true third party in the United States?
Structurally, no. It's really set up to be a two-party system. You have to really take over one of the two parties. And frankly, the problem in our politics right now, I'm not saying the Republican Party is great, but the Democrat Party has basically been taken over by woke socialists. So, So I think that kind of limits your options. But I mean, what you have to do is create a movement, and then you basically take over one of the parties.
Right.
I mean, what we're describing today, just to up-level it, is it almost feels like we're in a race between technological acceleration and social and political deterioration. Right. So technology.
Wait, say it one more time.
We're in a race, I think, for the future between technological acceleration and social and political deterioration.
Wow. And
the question is, which one of these forces is going to win the future? Everything Friedberg described is incredibly hopeful, right? We're going to be able to cure people with all these miracle technologies. Even the new mRNA vaccines that were developed for COVID, it's miraculous, right? And we're going to be able to use that same mRNA technology for other things, other diseases, maybe even to attack cancer cells. So there's so many positive things happening, and we all see it in the technology ecosystem. There's been an explosion of wealth creation and opportunity created over the last 20 years in technology. And so we have this very positive force. And then everything that seems to be happening in our politics and society is negative. It involves deterioration. It's basically a special interest corruption. It's basically people wedded to these insane ideologies. And you're right. What we really want is just a pragmatic party that allows the private sector to do its job, generate the wealth necessary to then fund social programs, instead of trying to upturn the whole system, which is what it feels like so many people in power are trying to do today.
Yeah. So I registered Reason Party for us if we ever want to go there. So if you want to bookmark Reason Party,
let's talk about this tonight, boys, because I got to run.
Is it on? Yum yum.
I'm going to see two of you tonight. Yeah. I cannot wait.
Sachs, you got to fly up. You got to fly up.
Sachs. What's the point of having a bird if you don't let the bird out of the cage?
Our friend from LA is flying up.
Yeah.
You can
Our
fly
other
up.
friend who puts the ball in the basket is coming.
Yeah. There are many friends. LA friends.
Come on, Sachs. Come
Basketball friends.
Free the bird.
I'll take it under advisement. Speaking of bird, they just announced a SPAC today. So
here comes the plug.
Here we go. Love you guys.
You got no fuckings.
I gotta go.
I'd like to give a shout out to Bird on SPAC. I love you, besties, and we'll see you
guys
next time.
See you guys
on the All In Podcast. Bye-bye.
Love you guys.
We'll let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sack.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, besties. Queen of Quinoa. Besties are back.
Code 13. That is my dog taking a notice in your driveway.
We should all just get a room and just have one big huge orgy because they're all just useless. It's like this sexual tension that they just need to release somehow.
Wet your beak. Wet your beak.
Wet your beak.
We need to get merch.
Besties are back.